This is TWiT.
Okay, at the top of the news for our listeners this week is that my call for the creation of a LastPass vault de-obfuscator, I called it, it's not a decryptor because we can't decrypt the vault easily, but as we know, a lot of the non-encrypted information was obfuscated. It was, just converted into hex, which you should do when you're moving stuff across the internet, which, many of the areas of the internet still don't support, or maybe that's not true anymore, but everyone still does it. 8-bit bytes, so like 7-bit characters is the reason that weird things have to be converted. And also, if you're using XML, where, for example, you've got angle bracketed starting and ending formatting stuff, well, if the content of what you're sending had an angle bracket in it, that would foul up the XML parser. So I asked our listeners, I said, I'm sure there's a bunch of coders out here. Let's see if somebody by this time next week, which is today, can come up with something. So
wow, they responded too.
Sure enough, I got a whole bunch of people, did a bunch of different things. Several listeners produced JavaScript solutions. Paul Holder, who I know you know.
Love Paul. He's a Java guy, not JavaScript. He's a Java guy.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, he wrote a portable solution in Java. Several others wrote solutions in C, C++, and C#. And I was sure that would be the case.
We got some real coders out there. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay, but the solution, which surprised me, it really captured my attention, was both the smallest of all by far and the most powerful. It was implemented as a Windows PowerShell script.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And having seen what PowerShell's scripting language can do with its full access to the .NET language, it's clear to me that I'm going to need to make some time, I don't know, someday, to take a much closer look at it. It's sort of amazing what has quietly been happening over there. I've got a picture of this little PowerShell script, which I guess you would call an app, even though it's a script. Perl is technically a scripting language, but you make apps with it. So we have a solution that I'll explain in detail in a moment. And it is this week's Security Now Podcast 905 shortcut. So everyone can get the PowerShell script by going to grc.sc/905. And when you hit enter, that'll present you with a zip file. Well, anyway, I'll explain all that in a second. So the way we got here is almost as interesting as what we got. And I confess that it would have never occurred to me. It began with a Twitter DM from a listener named Rob Woodruff. Rob tweeted to me. He said, "All right, Steve, you asked and I delivered. I wrote a PowerShell script to parse the XML file that is your LastPass vault. Identify any values encrypted with ECB rather than CBC, and decode the URLs from hex to ASCII. I chose PowerShell so that it will run on any modern Windows computer. It's not fancy, but it appears to work." Now, he's not actually talking about this at the moment. Not fancy, but it appears to work. You'll need to specify the in-file, out-file, and format parameters on the command line. None of that's still true. Or it will prompt you for them. In-file is the path and file name of the XML file, your LastPass vault. Out-file is the path and file name of the output file. He says format is the format of the output file, either CSV, comma separated values, or HTML. Anyway, and then he sent me a link. You can download it here, and he sent me a Dropbox link. Okay, so that was Rob's first of what ended up being many messages between the two of us. And that's, as I said, far from where we ended up. About 4 hours later, this was on Friday evening, he followed up. He said, "This version of the script has a GUI." And then he sent me a Dropbox link, so a graphical user interface. Upon seeing this, as I said, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to pay more attention to PowerShell. So I replied, "Holy crap, Rob, you're a PowerShell wizard. I'll check this out tomorrow. Thank you so much. To which Rob replied, my pleasure, Steve. I really enjoyed the process. First time doing a GUI in PowerShell. Not sure I can claim the title of wizard, though. I had ChatGPT do most of the heavy lifting. And he said, speaking of which, if you haven't played around with it.
Maybe ChatGPT is a PowerShell wizard.
He said, speaking of which, if you haven't played around with it, meaning ChatGPT, you must. It will blow your mind. Okay, now, I mean, mind blown. I said, okay, being unsure whether Rob might be pulling my leg, I wrote back. I said, Rob, are you not kidding? Did ChatGPT really have a hand in that? I mean, this was like a functioning app with graphical user interface. And he said, Steve, I'm not kidding. ChatGPT is supposedly fluent in every written language, including programming languages. I told it in English what I wanted to do, and it spat out PowerShell code.
Well, more than that, it's apparently familiar with the LastPass XML format.
He said, it's not perfect, of course, and I spent a lot of time debugging the hex to ASCII conversion. Ultimately, I ended up using a code snippet for the conversion that I found using Google because ChatGPT couldn't seem to figure it out. Similarly, when I asked ChatGPT to add a GUI, it got most of it right on the first try, but it had two of the buttons being overlapped by text fields. So, well, boo-hoo, fine, thank you.
Wait a minute, anyway, ChatGPT does GUIs too? Wow.
Yes.
PowerShell, no less. Wow.
Yes. This thing is 12K, Leo. That thing that you saw is a 12K script. Okay, so he said, I had to adjust the positioning of the elements manually. He said, overall, though, it saved me a lot of time. I probably wouldn't have even tried to tackle this project without ChatGPT. Okay, so we've clearly entered a very different world. What Rob explained is consistent with everything we've heard about ChatGPT. It's not yet perfect, but it's very good. And it can typically get you, 95% of the way there. And then, you need to go in and fix the things it got wrong. But wow. So anyway, I thought that was just very cool. I then worked with Rob through Friday evening and through the weekend to polish and perfect this little 12K gem to ready it for today's podcast. Remember that being a script, it's entirely open source and therefore readily verifiable. And remember from last week that the key to obtaining the LastPass Vault is using the developer features of any browser that's currently logged into LastPass. Though this part is still a bit inconvenient, there's no way around that without a huge amount of work to recreate everything that a browser does. And actually, as I was putting this together, putting the show notes together last night, I thought, maybe we just ask ChatGPT to write us a browser. Anyway, or
SpinRite. Maybe, well.
Actually, somebody did. So I received a DM from someone who said, how would you write SpinRite? And it gave a complete description of how to do that.
Not assembly code, just the description.
No, it didn't do any. It didn't write any code, but it explained all the steps
what
that would be.
SpinRite does, which is interesting.
Yes. I'm sure it went out there and found out what SpinRite was and said, "Okay, here's how you do."
We are in an interesting time, I have to say.
Oh, it is. It is a really
We're right on the cusp of something. Not sure how good it's going to be, but we'll see.
So. I know. Well, it's going to change the world, right? Yeah. I mean, kids are going to grow up in a different world than we did. And, of course, old fogies are all like, when I was a kid, you had to actually use a pencil and sharpen it. But, Anyway.
Yeah, I say that all the time. I know how that is.
So it's necessary to still involve the developer console of the browser. Okay, so just I want to give people the instructions they need, especially those not familiar with running a PowerShell script. So first grab the PowerShell script that Rob wrote from my server. I'm hosting it, although he also has it on GitHub, and there's an update button on his GUI that'll take you over to his page on GitHub in case, it goes through some revisions. But as I said, grc.sc/905, that will return a tiny zip file containing one file titled analyze-lastpassvault.ps1. That's the PowerShell script. And as we've learned on this podcast, encapsulating the script in a zip prevents Windows from tagging the script inside the zip with the dreaded mark of the web. So you don't need to see the warning about the dangers of using something that's been downloaded from the internet. As a very useful security measure, Windows will no longer run unsigned PowerShell scripts. And before this all began, I didn't even know you could sign a PowerShell script, but turns out you can, and I did. So since I didn't want anyone to be put off by that, I mean, it gives you all kinds of scary warnings and things, and you can say, yeah, run it anyway. And since signing also does a useful verification that nothing has been altered, I signed Rob's final script with GRC's EV code signing cert. So Windows will see that it's been signed, and it will run it all without complaint. So after downloading it, launch a PowerShell prompt with from the Windows menu, or you can just type PowerShell into the search box and it'll get you there. This does not need to be run with elevated admin privileges, so anyone should be able to do this. Start the script by entering, and this is odd, reminiscent of Linux. You need to say // and then analyze-lastpassvault.ps1 in order to get it to go.
That's just and then say execute it from this directory.
Exactly, from the current directory. Yeah, don't go looking around for it.
It's not in the path.
So press enter. The Analyze LastPass Vault app will be displayed on your desktop. You'll find complete instructions there in the app itself, right there in the UI for proceeding. So you can likely race off on your own without the rest of this, but I can provide a little bit of additional background for clarification. With Rob's app running, switch to the browser and log into LastPass so that you're looking at your vault, like many people did last week when we first talked about the way to grab your vault. Press the F12 key or Control-Shift-I, which toggles the developer mode. And so that'll suddenly subdivide your screen vertically into the browser on the left and the developer stuff over on the right. Then select the console tab in the developer window, and things may be like scrolling like crazy. Wait for them to settle down. That'll eventually stop. Once you have a cursor flashing there at the bottom, you're ready. To make this as easy as possible, we built in the 3 lines of JavaScript code that needs to be dropped into the browser at this point. So you just press Copy Query button in Rob's app, which places those 3 lines onto the system's clipboard. So then bring the browser to the foreground so that it has the system focus, and hit Control-V, to paste those 3 lines into the browser, and you'll see them appear there after the cursor. Then press enter to execute the query, and the page will fill with XML expressions. That's your encrypted LastPass vault. As I described last week, down at the very bottom of the screen will be the options to display more of the text that was cut off because it's way longer than will fit on the screen. Also, to copy the entire query results to the system's clipboard. That's what you want, so click on Copy. Now, switch back to Rob's app and click the Paste button. That will paste the captured clipboard directly into Rob's app without needing to go through the intermediate step of saving it to a file. And note that if last week you had already copied your XML format vault out of a browser and may have terminated your account with LastPass, you can also provide Rob's app with that file name to load and then process. Okay, so with the vault made available to the app, either by pasting it or opening a file, specify an output file name to receive the de-obfuscated data, and choose the output format, either CSV or HTML. The CSV format will ideally require something in your system for viewing it, like Excel. I like the HTML format since your browser, and we all have a browser, will happily display that. So set the file name ending in either CSV or HTML as needed, and finish by clicking Analyze. The file will be written, and then the resulting file will be launched for display by whatever handler your system has registered for handling that type of file. And as I said, if you exported HTML, the results will be displayed in a nicely formatted, scrollable window with one line per login record. Actually, same thing for CSV. So, Rob's app displays an OK on the far left if the encrypted account information was encrypted using the better CBC cipher mode. And we'll review that again a little bit in a second. If the record's encrypted information was encrypted with the suboptimal information leaking ECB cipher mode, you'll see the message warning encrypted with ECB. Next on the line, and likely most interesting to everyone, will be the de-obfuscated URL that's associated with the website's encrypted logon record. Taken as a whole, these are all the sites for which LastPass's vault contained your logon information. And it's notable that the vault does not appear to contain the user's unencrypted email address to associate who they are with the vault, nor is there any indication of the number there of PBKDF2 iterations that were being used to obtain the vault's decryption key from the user's email address and password. That information is necessary to run the password-based key derivation function to decrypt the key which is used to decrypt the vault. Otherwise, it requires brute force. So it must be that it's provided to the user's client through another query, other than the one we just used in order to get the vault's bulk content. But LastPass's infamous December 22nd breach update, in that they said, quote, "The threat actor copied information from backup that contained basic customer account information and related metadata, including company names, end user names, billing addresses, email addresses, telephone numbers, and the IP addresses from which customers were accessing the LastPass service." So, to that we can now add everything that Rob's LastPass Vault Analyzer makes crystal clear. Given the amount of effort that will generally be required, and we have a bracing update on that coming up next, to brute force the decryption of the encrypted information in even one LastPass vault, coupled with the fact that tens of millions of LastPass user vaults were obtained en masse, the direct threat of decryption for a single individual, unless directly targeted, would seem to be very small. But assuming that
because they have the metadata, it's easier for them to target somebody, don't you think?
Correct. Well, yes.
Like if you had the login to the Strategic Air Command's Missile Control Center in your LastPass vault,
you'd be highly motivated.
People would want to get into it, right?
Yes.
They're going to have to pick and choose. Obviously, they're not going to decrypt them all. Why would they?
Correct.
Yeah.
But assuming that it's possible for the bad guys to associate company names, end user names, physical addresses, email addresses, telephone numbers, and IP addresses with specific vaults, and that must be possible because LastPass has to do it, and this is the information that they lost.
Yeah, it's the metadata that they didn't encrypt.
Yes, even without any decryption, what you get is a comprehensive dump of exactly who logs on exactly where.
Right.
And if you scroll horizontally all the way to the right of Rob's HTML output, there's also a last touched field.
Oh, jeez.
Containing a time code that shows when the last logon at that domain occurred.
Oh, my God.
So even without the use of any brute force decryption of the vault's encrypted contents, this represents at best a significant privacy compromise for every LastPass user.
And LastPass could have, there was no technical reason they didn't encrypt that data. They could have. Yes? Other password managers do.
Yes. Well, I did a test. I was wondering why they didn't encrypt the URLs. So I thought, well, maybe if I'm not logged in so that my vault is encrypted, right? If I'm not logged into LastPass, so I have no vault present.
Yeah.
Maybe LastPass doesn't add the little LastPass highlights to the username and password field if it knows it doesn't have the ability to fill that in.
Who cares?
So I thought, okay.
By the way, Bitwarden does not do that. A lot of password managers don't. I think that's a silly little JavaScript feature. Go ahead. Turns out what?
It turns out that's not the case. Which is to say, which is to say, LastPass always puts that in
always there.
All of the username and password fields. So I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, saying, well, maybe they're being smart about where the user, where it knows the user has the ability to log in. No. So Leo, I can find no rationale.
And we're not saying that they should encrypt it with AES 256 in your vault, but they should probably hash it so that it shouldn't be plain text in your metadata in the vault. A lot of this
I don't
There's
yet,
no benefit to doing it.
I don't yet see a reason for them doing it. And I tried one idea, but that wasn't it.
And you could see why. So there is already a class action lawsuit, and the guy who started it claims, and we haven't verified this, but claims that he lost $53,000 in cryptocurrency. You could see why this is important. If you're going to attack somebody, find somebody maybe who has a shared crypto wallet on Coinbase. That kind of information is being leaked. It gives you a way to prioritize which vaults you go after.
Oh, wait, honey, there is way more coming.
Oh, no. It's perfectly possible. We don't know that there is somebody right now running, his old Bitcoin mining apparatus, because he doesn't have any use for that anymore, against all of the vaults, and just the first ones that come out are the ones he's going to use, right? Because they have bad passwords or whatever, or their PBKDF2 is 500.
One last note before we look at what's been learned from a week of feedback from our listeners, which, as I said, is a little bit bracing.
Oh, boy.
If executing Rob's PowerShell script produces errors rather than the presentation of a nice graphical interface, as it initially did for me on my Windows 7 machine, I wanted to note that it's possible to update any Windows PowerShell support, even Windows 7, to the latest version 5.1. Microsoft wants you to have it. So I have a link for that at the bottom of page 4 of the show notes that will help anyone update their PowerShell script just in case you get an error. Okay.
Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. Supplement your online IT and audit training by brushing up on hot topics. Join ACI Learning's IT Pro and audit subject matter experts in ACI Learning's webinar series. Catch it live or watch on demand at your convenience. Visit acilearning.com and give your IT team superpowers with ACI training.